Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Vancouver Life Real Estate Podcast and YouTube channel. Today, we are very excited to have Vince Taylor with us. Vince Taylor is the president of Pilothouse and has been since he joined in 2005. Pilothouse is BC's second biggest real estate sales and marketing company. He is a seasoned business leader, media commentator, and author of the book Beyond the Blindfold. Vince, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start off by giving our listeners a little bit more information about yourself and how Pilothouse got started.
Well, that's a great question. First, thank you for having me. This is exciting for me as well. Pilothouse got started, without boring your listeners to death, way back after the slowdown of 1999. There was just nothing going on here in Vancouver, and the idea that we needed to deal with pre-sales, which actually started in 1992, came up again because the market started to build, and there just wasn't a group taking care of, hard to believe today, what we'll call small projects, $25, $30 million projects, 100-unit projects in Surrey, 100-home projects here and there. And I really didn't have a lot of experience in that area. So I'd come from the development business, and I thought, well, how hard can this be? Turns out quite hard. So strangely enough, somebody said to me, would you like to do a conversion, not having any idea what it is? I said, absolutely, and it happened to be in Seattle. Oh, a conversion in Seattle, no problem. I've done 1 million of those. Like, what? You kidding me? And the Seattle market took off. So we started to work actually in the U.S. markets. And it broadened from there, where Pilothouse took a more of a global focus. So we have worked in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, California, Hawaii,
wow, very cool.
Everywhere, even in the Mediterranean.
Wow.
And so my view of real estate has always been very broad. I would love to say that was a great business plan, but that's just kind of the way it is. And that idea of understanding the macroeconomics of real estate has really helped us to understand the microeconomics right here in Vancouver. So we've had a long history of that. As a developer, just as a historical note, and some people will argue with me, but I did the very first pre-sale project ever in British Columbia.
Very cool.
Out in Walnut Grove.
Yeah.
And at that time, of course, we had no idea what we're doing. We're going to sell things before they were built. Well, how exactly is that going to work? And it was a crazy idea. I don't think we made any money on it because we forgot that costs also escalated during that time. So it was an idea whose time had come, and it's probably worthy of a whole other podcast, because how pre-sale actually got started and why it got started and what it meant to the banking industry and the finance industry isn't well understood today. And yet there isn't a project sold anywhere in the Western world that doesn't use pre-sale.
Yeah.
And it all started a little bit in Toronto, but Vancouver is the pre-sale capital of the world. We do it better here than anywhere else in the world. So
I've had some experiences with pre-sales, and I can tell you they've been good and horrible.
Well, it is worthy of a whole conversation, because the banking industry viewed condominiums, without, again, going too far back, there was no such thing as a strata title. You couldn't take an apartment building and break it up into little birdhouses. Prior to about 1975, that didn't even exist.
No kidding.
So the mental idea of taking a building and breaking it up was a brand new idea. So it caught the banking industry off guard, because they didn't know, how do you finance a birdhouse within a house?
Right.
Because it wasn't a thing. And actually one of the first Bearland stratas was on Pender Island.
No kidding.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, how could it be on Pender Island?
Of all places.
Yeah, of all places. And yet the idea, so the legal community had to adapt, the banking community had to adapt. And quite frankly, in those days, developers didn't look to the sales and marketing experts. They just built whatever they wanted. And quite often the market didn't accept it.
Interesting.
So the bank had already lent money on it. Now you've got an empty building. And you can see what happens. They went, well, we have to change this. And then the whole finance world changed anyway. So I'm my gray hair, if you can see me on the YouTube channel, some of it's very well earned from the days in the 80s and the 90s. But it's a really fascinating story. But here we are today, and Pilothouse specializes in pre-sale condos. And we're one of a few really excellent groups in the city that do it. We all kind of do the same thing, and we all think we're better than the other guys, of course. But we're in Vancouver really, really good at this.
Do you guys still sell all over the world as well, or is it primarily just in Vancouver now?
Primarily just because of the last 2 or 3 years, the U.S. market slowed down. Obviously, things changed after the financial crisis, and price points begin to change as well. Where if you get into the super luxury markets where you're selling 10, 20, $30 million homes in Hawaii, that's not really our game. So we will absolutely look at products anywhere in the world, but the last 4 or 5 years have been here because also the recreational market slowed down. We did a lot of ski resorts, golf resorts, this kind of thing.
Wow, very cool.
When the Alberta market stopped, which was the primary driver for the Okanagan.
Yeah, we're still stuck out there with some investments.
Well, there you go. So we did a lot of work in the Okanagan and I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Cool.
Ski resorts, golf resorts, but that market has changed. It's coming back quickly. And it's absolutely something we would look at.
Nice.
Yeah.
So safe to say you've got a very sort of almost global perspective on what's happening in real estate over the last 20 plus years.
Absolutely.
So I guess to kind of explore a little bit further about pre-sales and where they are today, I know a lot of people will often look to pre-sales as a first-time homebuyer option, right? Maybe they've scraped up enough for that first 5 or 10% and they are, hoping to be qualified by the time it completes. But a lot of people and first timers that we talk to, they're still trying to wrap their heads around the cost. Why are pre-sales so expensive? And, because they come at it from, like I said, first time home buyer perspective, they don't know much and they don't know how much is actually given to the cities, how much goes to taxation, what the costs of building are growing like. Maybe you can give a bit of insight how that's changed over the years and maybe the challenges developers face these days to build new homes in Vancouver.
Boy, that's about a 10-part question.
Yeah.
Let's and all great notes. All 10 are great. Well, let's go back to a little bit about taxation. We'll start there. Taxation is a double-edged sword. We all want to have universal Medicare. We want our children to be taken care of when we go to the hospital. We want our roads to be taken care of, but we don't want to pay any taxes. That's just a universal problem.
Correct.
There's only one taxpayer, and it's 3 of us and everybody else that you know. So where do the property purchase taxes and all these other things come in? Well, they're snuck in as taxes because there is no other way of gaining money to live in a country that we want to live in. Right now, we're starting a federal election. First 2 things, we need more money for healthcare and education every time. Repeat it ever since I've ever been born. Where does that money come from? There's no mystery taxpayer. So as much as we detest taxes, I think it's a fact of life here in Canada. If you buy a car, you look at the price, it's going to be on top, tax is going to be on top. And that's the same with housing. So it frustrates a lot of first-time buyers who don't want to believe that's true, but they're quite happy if they break their leg on the way home to go to the hospital and get it fixed for free, what we'll call free.
Sounds like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, so this is a challenge. Now, for the record, I'm absolutely against the foreign buyer's tax. I find it horribly discriminatory and racist in my view, and I don't mind saying this on the record. It's basically a Chinese head tax. I can't imagine walking into a hotel and having 2 prices on the menu, one for locals and one for foreign buyers. It would be considered absurd, and that's what we've done here.
Agreed.
In my view, the foreign buyers, whoever they are, have been blamed for many of the ills because it makes great headlines. The truth of the matter is it's childish to assume that sophisticated buyers from other countries don't have 10 workarounds.
Of course.
If you want to buy a $10 million house in Shaughnessy, you phone your brother in Richmond, he buys it for you. Come on, let's get over this. But it doesn't make good headlines, to tell the truth. And if you're truly, truly laundering money, do you really care about 20%?
No.
Not at all.
No.
It's a complete red herring. I don't like it. But the rest of the taxes, in fact, the PPT was started in 1987 with a right-wing social credit government, Bill Vander Zalm. I'm not terribly political, but obviously I'm a bit of a right-winger. And it was Vander Zalm, of all people, who started that. But the average house price at that time was $150,000.
Right.
So it didn't seem like a lot of money.
That's right.
And yet today, that PPT has grown to 5% on purchases over $3 million.
And the houses have gone to 10x.
Right. So that's outrageous when you look at the dollars. However, if you've got 10 million, you can afford the tax, get over it. So if we want to live in this beautiful country that people like to come to and aspire to, taxes are a part of life. And unfortunately, for the first-time buyer, that gets factored into the price because, to touch on your second point, and I want to come back to this, the development community also knows there's a limited amount of money. So we have to price homes accordingly, factoring in the tax. If we price it at a point that a buyer can't buy it, the free market takes over. So the price is the price is the price. As Michael Levy used to say, the economist here, he told me one day, he said that the cure for high prices is high prices. Not too sharp. I couldn't get my head around that. It's taken me a few years to figure it out. When socks become $42, people stop buying socks. $32 you might buy them, $22, $5, Walmart, no, I buy all. So when prices exceed the realistic expectations and the ability of people to pay, prices come down. That's not the case here. So that's just the fact about that. Now, I'd like to touch on a point perhaps that others, you may not hear it from too much. The great hypocrisy of Vancouver real estate. And I'm going to start with myself being biggest hypocrite. You two guys are next though.
Oh, I'm sure we are.
You're getting it. If I'm getting it, you're getting it. The first thing you do when you get a sweet deal is you phone him and you gloat, right? You wouldn't believe this condo I picked up at Super. I'm a better realtor than you. Look what I did. Your second call is, I can't believe how much it's gone up, right? Because we want two things. We want prices low the day we buy them, and the day after we want them to go up.
Naturally.
And yet we're talking about affordability. Well, you can't have it both ways. So let's unpack this a little bit. You guys are realtors. There's no pension plan for realtors.
Correct.
Your pension plan today, unlike 50 years ago, is most often your real estate. You get $1,000 a month from the Canadian government. That's not going to even touch your wine bill.
No.
That's a couple of bottles of Bordeaux here. So on one hand, 90% of new business is started by companies with less than 5 employees. No pension plan. Real estate that you bought for $50,000 used to go to 60 or 65 or 70, but it wasn't considered part of your pension plan. General Motors or Fraser Mills or somebody gave you your pension plan. But somehow along the way, the world has changed. And our real estate is our absolute only hope for our retirement. So the minute we buy our real estate, we want it to go up, but everybody else wants it to go down. But we want it to go down the day we buy your new condo, and then we want it to go up the very next day so he doesn't get the same deal that you got.
Correct.
So the hypocritical nature, and I get this all the time, people saying, oh God, I've been priced out of the market, but you wouldn't believe how much my house went up. Well, who do you think drove the price of housing up?
Correct.
So we get into this question I'm sure you're going to ask me about, well, why are these condos so expensive? What about City Hall? What about all this stuff? In one hand, thank God for the lack of supply. Thank God for the delays, or you guys got no retirement fund.
Yeah.
So we can't sit here and say we want affordability and we want it to go up. Pick a poison.
Yeah. Well, and further to that, I mean, if you go back to the early 90s or late 80s, it was very much part of the plan to buy an investment property for $150,000 and then sell it 30 years later for a substantial gain. That's very difficult now for us, right? So as the next generation of people coming through, the idea of buying an investment property that is going to, even 3x is a very difficult thing to do now because the capital requirement is so high. And then you look at the rents that don't necessarily match up with that capital requirement. And now all of a sudden I've got to put down so much money to get not a great cash flowing property.
Right.
So it has changed, I think, the perspective of buying a home or buying a secondary home or a third home with the idea of it being able to appreciate the way it has in the past, right? And I don't know if that's going to be the case forever, but I do feel that, the cost of real estate has gotten so high that the rest of us have to get somewhat creative now. And, I look at, myself and, there's, for example, one of the investments that we own in Alberta, it took 5 guys to come together, pool all of our cash together, split it up, and then, and everybody brought different levels of cash, so there's different levels of ownership. But that was a creative way to buy an investment property and kind of go long term with it. Again, different from what was in the late 80s, early 90s, because I think the ability to get in was lower. There was a lower bar of entry, but now it's requiring more creativity. And I think that kind of feeds into some of the mindset issues that I think we have in both Vancouver and probably in Canada as a whole. We as Canadians are obviously very proud of our country, and we feel that we are entitled to live here. And I think that becomes a bit of an issue when you realize that maybe you work for a global company. So for example, I'm entitled to buy a home here because I was born here, yet I work for Amazon or I work for a global company. I get paid based on how that company performs globally. So there's a major disconnect that's now taking place. And it's people don't understand that they've got to get more creative, more competitive in order to get themselves ahead. Would you agree with that?
I would. And to distill your articulate comments down, in the old days, and I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old. Yes, the Beatles were still together when I was in school. But anyway, aside from that, it was always a thing that 1 year's salary bought a car and 5 years' salary bought a house. That's not the case today in Vancouver. To your point, real estate has changed. But if you step outside of Vancouver, it's still more or less true. The average income for the average blue-collar worker is $50,000. Secondary income from the other spouse might be 30, with an average household income about 85, 86,000. You'll find that all over the GBRD. Well, you can buy a really nice car for 50,000, but you can't buy a really nice house for 350,000. That's not possible, even with two incomes. But if you go to Merritt, you go to Kamloops, you go to Vernon, you go up further, Houston, BC, you can still do these things. So it becomes this tangled question of entitlement. Because I was born in Port Moody, to your point, I should always get to live in Port Moody. If you were born in Manhattan, you got to go live in Queens, because not many people get to live in Manhattan. And now we're more expensive than that because of our global nature. So I understand the sense of it, because I came from the day when you could buy a house with 5 years' pay, but you can't anymore.
Right.
And that's the fact. So creativity now is the norm. And if you aren't willing to be creative, you're out. The worst part, and just to tie up that last thought, if you don't work for Amazon, if you work for yourself, if you have a little company and you're a graphic designer or a tax accountant, you've got no pension. We can talk a little later about buying habits and how they've changed, but if you don't get into the market, there is no safety net for you. If you're mid-30s today and you are a lifetime renter, which many people are, and we have to get our heads around that, unless you have wealthy parents or Aunt Brenda, who always gets vilified by me, poor Aunt Brenda, that old spinster, you got no chance. You will have no pension. So it's a really critical thing that real estate is the one thing today that drives our ability to retire.
Well, and to your point, during the pandemic, the average household net worth for a renter rose by $8,000 throughout the 20 months of the pandemic that we've been in so far. The very same homeowner has gone up by roughly $80,000. Right? And that's in the course of 2 years.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And I think that I mean, you know, I've got a lot of clients that are still renting and trying to get in, and you know, when I tell them that, you know, it almost allows them to understand the sacrifice they're making or having to make, right?
And it's unpleasant. It really is unpleasant. And as people who are in the market, we don't want to stand on the top of our ivory tower and throw rocks.
No.
Especially somebody like me who has grown children. The trend that we have seen in the pre-sale market, we can loop back to your original question, is the pre-sale market gives the ability for young people to get into the market.
That's right.
We used to see that people waited to transfer the money to the kids until they died.
Yeah.
Turns out guilt is way better than greed. Now you can go over Sunday and say, I bought you this house, you make me dinner. All right? This is awesome as a parent. So now you can lord it over them. This is a beautiful thing. But if you're dead, you can't say any of that good stuff. So what we're seeing is about 30% of the homes that we sell in any pre-sale project these days are sold to people who have received their down payment gifted from parents and grandparents.
Interesting.
Resale.
There you go. And so without that, I mean, the pre-sale market gives you the ability to get in obviously for a lot less, and I think that's why we see it. Maybe, you know, like if you're buying for $300,000, it doesn't take so much to get you that 15% down.
You don't necessarily have to qualify for that mortgage right now.
Correct. And if you're getting grandma's money, she'll give you $5,000 out of her little purse. I don't know if grandma still have little purses, but they used to take cash out and give it to you. But you can get $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. You're not asking them for $100,000. Without that, you don't get in. But it's a beautiful, beautiful entry point. Taxes notwithstanding, everybody knows there's taxes. And taxes notwithstanding, you factor that into the price and you get into the market in any way. If it takes 5 guys, if it takes 3 guys, 2 guys, or your Aunt Brenda, get into the market.
Yeah, to speak to some creativity, I think some of my listeners know, or our listeners know this. My first real estate project, the first thing I ever bought was in Alberta. I understood, let me just back up a little sec. When I was 23, fresh out of UBC, I recognized pretty quick that one, I had no money. Two, I really wanted to travel. So I did that for a little bit. And then when I came back, not only was I broke, I had some worldly experience, but I wasn't really connected to Vancouver at that point. And I sat down, I was playing soccer. It was kind of around the 2007, 2008 timeframe when the market crashed, right? And not only did the market crash, but work was generally unavailable, right? I was bartending. And I was lucky. I had a guy who came in, kept having some beers, kept coming back, told me to come play soccer with him. So I came out, played soccer. Turns out he was in development and construction. And they were a homegrown company out of Williams Lake. And they were almost in debt when I joined them. And when I left them, they were doing 60, 70 million a year, right? And for about 10 years, I went on that growth. But what I learned was that I went to Alberta for 30, 40, 50 days in a row where I would work. And I would sacrifice when my friends were out doing their thing here, right? And then when I came back, I was able to get into real estate. But I did so because when I was out there, I bought a trailer, of all things, in a trailer park that we were building, right? Then I had an opportunity to buy the land that it sat on. So I flipped that. And that's how I made my first little piece of equity. And I kept flipping that into then a condo. Then I met my wife at the time, my girlfriend. We decided to buy a place together, and we kept flipping and flipping and flipping. But we had to be creative, right? And I think when people are like, I've been living in Vancouver for 20 years now, and I want to buy a place. And it's sort of like, well, what have you done to get ahead? Because the rest of the world is out competing you. And then they're coming here with their money and they're buying real estate. And why wouldn't they? This is one of the best places in the world you can buy real estate. It's a real estate forward city.
It is. Hypocrisy notwithstanding.
Yes, yes.
Anyway, I've given you a very long answer to your questions. I hope I covered some of those.
It was pretty loaded, but thank you.
There's a lot to there, but pre-sale is the way to get in, and it really is a wonderful opportunity, not because it sounds self-serving for me, because that's what I do. I don't care about that. It is the low threshold to get in, and we can get into more detail about that if you like.
Yeah, and I think, another story that I think you'll appreciate is right now we largely see for people that are thinking about buying their first home, there's kind of two mindsets. One, I'll wait till it crashes and I'll buy when it's cheap. Or two, I'm either going to hustle my butt off or get creative or both to get into that home. And I had a client who was living in Chilliwack, and he was very young. He was about 16 when he decided to work towards buying a home.
Wow.
He commuted 3 hours to work each way.
Uphill in the snow.
There you go.
Yeah.
3 hours each way, Chilliwack to North Vancouver, and just saved every single penny.
Yep.
And 3 years later, he bought his first home. It was a little studio. It was in Chilliwack. He didn't go pre-sale because he wanted to get a little bit closer to work. Yeah. But he got into the market at like 19 years old. And this was 3 years ago. And look what that has done for him now. Just because he was okay to sacrifice his life and that commute time for 3 hours to get ahead. Now his commute is 30 minutes, and we all know what properties have done in the last 3 years here. Yeah. It's not going to be handed to you. The reality of Vancouver is it is hard to get into, and you have to work your butt off and be creative to buy a home.
I read just before you interject, I read a really interesting note out of a book yesterday. And it said, you can be poor and it's hard. Or you can try and create wealth, and that's hard too. You decide which hard you want.
Mm-hmm. It's an introspective point and very true, of course. The pre-sale market gives people the opportunity. There are other stories, as you suggest, like that people can get into it just by self-sacrifice and just doing what you got to do. Right. And you can complain about it or you can get going. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the bottom line about it, because there isn't any other way. Work, save, invest. Yeah. Work, save, invest, work, save, invest. There's no shortcut to that, unfortunately. And I love those kind of stories where people work hard and get into the market. And the other thing about, the doomsday crowd, is, again, there's another bit of hypocrisy, because when the market fails, and it does about every, call it 7 years in a business cycle, and I've been through 4 major recessions, including coming out of high school in 1981, which I'm going to say was a real recession. It made these last couple look like nothing. What happens is real estate prices fall, but you also lose your job.
Right.
And you have no money, and you move in with your brother, who you never liked anyway. But he doesn't have a job, so the two of you live in a basement suite in some horrible location.
And you really hate each other.
You really hate each other, and the bathroom's down the hall, and that's how it was. I mean, there was no fancy granite stainless steel when we lived in our first apartment. You lived in a lady's basement, and she cooked pierogies above, and that's it.
That's it, yeah.
So the prices fell, but you couldn't take advantage of it because you had no money. So the rich get richer, because if you have money, then you take advantage of it. But that's the dreaded 1%ers.
Right.
Take them out of the equation. The flat earth doomsdayers who are telling us it's going to crash miss the second part of the equation. And that is the double hypocrisy about this market bubble bursting. You will have no money and you can't buy anyway.
Yeah.
So buy, get in, stop complaining.
That's right.
That's the message.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, looking forward, or looking back to look forward, the last couple or few recessions we've had, the Vancouver market seems to prove incredibly resilient every time. We seem to see this threshold in and around about 15% drop.
Yeah, that's about right.
And that's not much.
And land costs dropped 30 to 35% typically. Well, we had a horrible recession in 81, plus we had 20% interest rates.
Right.
God.
20%.
Yeah. That's
I mean,
amazing.
in my early lifetime, anything under 10% was considered a great mortgage rate.
Yeah. Wow.
So today's mortgage rates are ridiculous. We're stealing. And I mean, we don't want to go down another path because we only have so much time. The world economically can't function at these interest rates. We need about 5% to run the pension plans, to run things. You can't run a country on a 2% interest rate. So this is totally artificial. So when the interest rates go up again, which they will, where there's going to be a huge rush into the market.
Yeah.
When the airport's open, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but when the airport's open, that's one event. When the interest rates go up again, people go crazy, because a lot of buyers, as you guys know, get hung up. I got 1.89, I got 1.91. It doesn't matter. Newsflash. I don't care if you pay 2.5%. If you got the right deal, who cares?
Yeah.
Plan for 3% interest rates, and then 4, and then 5.
Yeah.
And get on with it. The message doesn't change because of that, but there'll be a huge surge again in value and price when the interest rates stop going up, because it scares people to think they're going to miss.
That's the FOMO mentality.
Correct.
Of
Correct.
What you supply and demand. When demand is running out and prices are going up, people go, I better buy before I can't buy. And that's the worst time to buy.
And people will also, they seem to get handcuffed thinking that increasing interest rates is going to result in another collapse or a collapse.
Yeah,
in the sense that
it certainly won't.
No, of course it won't. And I think they put all this attention on a singular aspect, as opposed to realizing there's a whole bunch of other levers that can be pulled.
Macro, micro. There we go.
We've all seen 40-year AMs in our life. That can come back like that.
Yeah.
Right? We've seen zero down on investment properties. That can come back, right? The banks are in the job of lending money, creating credit.
Yeah.
They're going to find a way to continue to do so, no matter what the interest rate is, as we've seen. It's been 20%, and they've been able to create credit.
The world didn't end. I'm here to tell you, we survived.
Yeah.
Wasn't fun, but I'm still here.
Are prices higher now than in the 80s?
It's hard for me to give you an articulate answer. I mean, real estate, as we know, appreciates at about 8%, right? Annually. The rule of 7, as the financial people like to call it. Your real estate will double every 10 years.
Correct.
Which is crazy to think that that's true. I bought my first house for $64,000, and I'm not that old. $64,000. And if you go back and look at it, it has doubled on average every 10 years.
That's incredible.
If you buy a house for $3 million, will it continue to double? It will. So if you bought a house for $500,000, 20 years later, that's what it's going to be worth. So the stock market appreciates about the same, and that's why they often tell you that the most successful stock investors are dead people, because they don't know, the estate's lost the passwords, and they've left these things to grow. No buying, no selling, no in, no out, no sweet deals, no hot tips. Just let it go.
Leave it.
Warren Buffett says, just let it go. 8%. And real estate's the same. There's more millionaires in real estate than there are in stock market, because we all own a house.
Leverage.
That's the only real reason.
Yeah.
But even if you don't leverage, if you just don't buy and sell, How many people, I work a lot in White Rock, and the typical buyer profile out there is 74 years old, glaucoma in one eye, bad hip, and their kids live in Toronto. They've lived in the same house for 42 years and they're not moving. You try to sell pre-sale to that crowd, hurry up and buy, and they look at you like, why?
Yeah.
But eventually you try to clean the gutters, or you fall off the ladder, or you get a scare when someone knocks on the door in the middle of the night, and we're all getting older. Mm-hmm. And then they'll buy, and they all say the same thing. I wish I'd done this years before. But that crowd doesn't flip, doesn't buy and sell. Mm-hmm. They bought that house, they cut the grass, they paint it, they keep it, and it appreciates and doubles every 10 years.
So I have a story for you on that. I'm in discussions right now with a group. It's in a crazy property market. It's in Point Grey, which, as we all know, is a very expensive market.
Yes.
They bought their home in 1981 on a 10,000 square foot lot, 3,200 square foot home. It's a teardown now, right? Mm-hmm. They paid $403,900 for it at the time.
A lot of money.
A lot of money. It's now $8 million.
Yeah, that's better.
But they are also 81 years old.
And they never moved.
And they've stayed in that home for 41 years.
And they never thought of themselves as fancy people.
That's right.
It was nice back in the day, of course, because you could buy a house in New Westminster for 60 grand, or you could buy a house there for 400 grand. Well, we didn't have 400 grand.
But even to that point, when you look at the school tax that they have to pay, and the property tax
we won't get anywhere else today if we go down this path.
It's $95,000 a year that they have to pay to live in that house, which is
criminal.
Asinine.
It's criminal, and it's not fair, and that's a whole different thing, because people being priced out of a home that they just lived in. They're not speculators.
No.
They're not anything. They just wanted to live in their home.
She's a nurse.
Yeah.
Or was a nurse.
Yeah.
Right? And he worked in environmental consulting. It's not like they were, stockbrokers and made tons of money. And
Mom and Dad may have left him a little bit of money, because $400,000 was a lot of money. It's easy to look back now, but it was a lot of money in those days. Sure. They didn't make a lot of money. Income levels have certainly improved, but not exponentially to keep up with the housing market.
Correct.
So, but if you follow that rule of 7 and your house doubles every 10 years in a reasonable market, like Vancouver, that's a fact. So just don't do anything. Get in the market and wait.
You bring up an interesting point, and something that I've talked a lot about in previous episodes. Obviously Vancouver has a huge affordability issue, and again, there's many layers of context inside of that.
There's a book about that.
Yeah, there is, isn't there? We'll touch on that in a sec. But what's interesting is, the biggest discrepancy, if you ask me, is the difference between what people earn annually versus the cost of real estate. And everybody says we need to bring real estate down. Well, what about doing something that allows you to get paid more? Right? I mean, it's the other side of the equation, but we never look at that side of the equation.
Well, the labor market's a free market as well.
That's right.
And how much do you pay your assistants? Right? Again, let's go back to being hypocritical. We should pay people more. You should double the salary of your personal assistant. No, I don't want to do that.
Well, we actually did.
Well,
we're not as bad as you think.
Good time. That's why people make 50 grand. The assistant manager at Costco makes 52.5. The guy that's working in the union, and he's got a 5-year clause where they're making 0, 0, 1, and 0.
Right.
Well, you make 52, then you might make 53, but you're not going to 80.
No.
You're not.
That's right.
And so those jobs, even though we talk about creating more union jobs, and I don't mean to be political at all, they get locked and loaded with your ability to earn income. And the way to earn income higher is to start your own company.
Correct.
Now, we also know that's not so easy, but that's how you do it. And I think that, to your point, the market has responded in that way, because 90% of all new jobs are created by groups of people with 5 or less employees.
Isn't that interesting?
That's how the market is. Government is no longer the government employs the other 10%, strangely enough. But small business is the driver.
And yet we look to the government to fix the issue.
Therein is another whole problem. Because the other part we forget, now we're off real estate, is we are the government. Right? We are the government.
In a democratic society, for sure.
We're those people, who are they? Well, they are us. They're supposed to be representing us, which is a whole different topic. And it gets into, I think one of the things you guys have discussed in the past is, why do building permits take so long? Why does this process take so long? And I don't know if you want to go there now, but it ties into your conversation. So if you're a politician, and most municipal politicians were single issue people, too much traffic, too many buildings, too many cats and dogs barking. Next thing you know, you get elected to city council. I didn't mean to do that. They're not paid overly well. They're trying to work 2 jobs. They got kids at home and they're doing their best, but they're not, to be very respectful, they're not fully qualified to do the jobs that they're doing because it isn't a full-time vocation or career. And then we expect them to be really good at all this other stuff. So you can get through all the process, first reading, second reading, all that stuff, but where everything bogs down is the thing called the public hearing, right? In other countries, a public hearing takes about 10 seconds. We're building this high-rise. That's it. You go to Shanghai, there is no public hearing.
It's about you listening.
And all those people who are living on the land where we're going to build a high-rise, you're moving. Here's a whole bunch of money. Go buy something in Vancouver.
Right.
Which is what happens. And that's a whole other thing about farmland in Saskatoon. You can come back and ask me about that.
Yeah.
Crazy. That's where all the money's going. So the politicians that we elect who didn't really want to be elected, who aren't really qualified to do all this, are expected to have knowledge bases that they don't have. The poor mayor doesn't really know either because he used to be doing some other job a few years ago.
But he still rents.
So you have a public hearing and you invite input, which completely bogs everything down. Now it's charming to have input, but the same 30 people go to every public hearing from Langley to Vancouver and complain about the traffic, complain about the noise, complain about what it used to be like in 1974 and bog down the system. If you live in Vancouver, your views are going to be blocked by the next high-rise. And that high-rise is going to be 100 stories tall, I hope, and it's going to be new traffic. And if you don't like it, move to Langley.
Yeah.
Or move to Vernon.
Yeah.
So the public hearing process, although beautifully democratic, and without it, you'd never get yourself elected because any politician who said, we don't care what the people think, doesn't have their job anymore.
Of course, yeah.
But one of the biggest stumbling blocks becomes the compromise, this compromise feedback loop that we get. I've been to millions of public hearings if I've been to one. As a developer and in this business, I always have to put on this fancy suit that I'm wearing, and I go and tell about the beautiful reasons why the city of X should build this beautiful building.
Right.
Of course, it's self-serving to some extent, but I truly believe that if you want affordability, remember hypocrisy, if you want affordability briefly, you have to have density.
Yeah.
You can't get density without going higher. You can't go higher without casting shadows on Jerry's barbecue next door.
And you need supply.
And you need supply, and there's more people coming, and we only have, to your point, I think you guys said 10,000 inventory, 6 to 10, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we've got 100,000 people right now. You touched on immigration in your last podcast. Yep. There's 100,000 people already qualified because we get on average about 50,000 to Vancouver. 2 years, no immigration. When that border opens, it's going to be a midnight madness sale. Where are we going to put 100,000 people?
So to your point, to that very point, with this looming...
Here's a softball for you.
Well, yeah, I'm going to tee it up here. And so we have a looming election.
Yes.
And we've got everybody promising all kinds of stuff right now.
Of course.
None of it really makes any sense, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, you've got the conservatives saying we're not going to let foreigners buy for 2 years, which is crazy. You've got the NDP saying we're going to build 500,000 new affordable homes throughout Canada at a rate of 50,000 per year. And, you know, right now we're at 280,000 nationally, housing starts. I don't know how we even get close to those numbers. And on top of that, where does the land come from? Who's paying for it? Yeah. You know, where is it? This all sounds like fluff. And how do we help the psyche of our home buyers and sellers and their expectations of real estate when this is happening? They're just unfortunately getting chewed up and spit out for votes or for whatever it is.
It goes back to your question because this is a very tangled economic lesson as well as just real estate. 95% of all the land in BC is owned by the Crown. Only 5% of all the land in BC is owned privately. Interesting stat. You never thought about that. Now, around here, we don't think about it because it's all private. But as soon as you leave the city, so your question at a high level, you know, if you're drinking homemade tea and you got your homemade slippers on, it seems like an easy question to answer because there's lots of land that's basically unoccupied and free.
Right.
But the problem is you don't want to live there. And I know I'm being trite and
no, a lot of Canada,
simplistic.
a lot of it is uninhabitable.
It's uninhabitable, but it's also in a place that you can't get a job.
Correct.
That's the real issue. As you drive up the Coquihalla, there's tens of thousands of acres of land. But if we build a beautiful condo up there, what are the people going to do? So, the Industrial Revolution started because people came off the farmland because they had the same problem in 1775. This is not a new issue. Came into the cities, which used to be empty, relatively speaking, because farming sucked.
Yeah.
And farming still sort of sucks. That's what they tell us. That's why the population of Saskatchewan until recently hasn't crossed 1 million people for 50, 80 years.
That's crazy.
Right?
Wow.
So now the cities become privately owned. So back to your question, how do we address the employment side of things? How do we get better wages if people live outside of town where they can afford it?
That's right. It's difficult.
So we get into this question, but if you say it quickly on a campaign trail,
Yeah.
we're going to build all these houses. Yes, you can. To your point that you said off air, Brandon, Manitoba, Lethbridge.
Yeah.
Except then you live in Lethbridge. And nothing against Lethbridge except nothing to do.
Yeah. And you're not going to make more than $50,000 a year.
No, you are not working at Buckerfield Seed and Company. You're just not going to make it.
Yeah. And what are you going to buy? What's your house going to look like for that?
The strangest market to me is Edmonton. You mentioned you're an Alberta expert.
Yeah.
Edmonton is crazy. The housing values in Edmonton are basically zero.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it. I've been called in to do a bunch of projects there, and the economics don't work. I haven't spent enough time to be an expert at it. You can buy a house in Edmonton today, a nice house with a suite, for $350,000.
It's mind-boggling.
And you still make $50,000. So the economics of cap rate work really well in Edmonton, but capital appreciation doesn't. Right? Same as if you buy a house in Merritt. You can get a 12 cap in Merritt, but you bought it for $100,000. 10 years later, it's worth $100,000.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later, it's worth $100,000.
Right.
But the point being is that capital appreciation and cap rate is a whole big longer discussion, and I know that you guys understand it. So when you buy a building in Kitsilano at a zero cap, people say, why would you ever do that? Well, because you bought it for $10 million, next year it's worth 15. Who cares about a cap rate? I don't care if people even pay rent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Then you get into the empty house tax and get into all this other stuff. So this is a very complicated economic discussion, and it's not simplistic, to your earlier point.
And so I think to that point, when it comes to the psyche of home buyers and sellers and their expectations, again, listening to what these promises are and how they're going to fix quote unquote affordability issues, I don't think it's going to at all. I think you need to look way beyond what's happening here.
You do, and we're always, when we market things, marketing 101 is find a devil, find a bad guy, propaganda, right? I mean, throughout history, there's some tragic examples and some wonderful examples. And again, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but the best marketing book ever written is the Bible. They were trying to think of something. Okay, if you come with us, we're going to go that way. If you don't, come on, we need something bad. How about fire? Fire. We need a guy with something scary and fire. We all know what that means. Okay, if you're not with us, you're going to the other place. Fire? What do you mean fire? It's a good metaphor, clouds and fire. Beautiful. So when we're selling anything, whether it's cars or houses or boats or stocks, there has to be a consequence. You're going to, if you don't want to buy it, that's cool. You just be one of those guys that's going to rent for the rest of your life. And how's that going to work out for you when you're, say, 65 and you're living in poverty? Or, Jerry and Mary, you can buy this house today and you'll be on the way to the glorious trip to the clouds, right? Fire clouds.
Yeah.
So there always has to be a bad guy. And credit to my partner, Bill Morrison, who came up with a beautiful metaphor back in the old days. We used to call it the velvet rope. Whenever you go to a fancy nightclub, New York, wherever, Paris, London, there's always a velvet rope in front of the nightclub and a giant bouncer and this huge lineup. And you're just pissed right off because you want to go in there so bad. Yeah. And then the VIP limo rolls up and they open that other velvet rope and they all run in. Then some beautiful girl walks by and they lift the rope and you're like, hey,
what the
dude.
hell? I'm here.
And you're trying to grease the... And then you get in there. There's nobody in the club.
I was just going to say.
And it's like, what? You've been scamming. You greased the guy $50.
Yeah.
The VIP table, they're up in their private bottle service. You don't even see him, but this sucks.
Yeah.
The velvet rope is a beautiful metaphor because what we used to call it is we include by excluding. You can be on our team, but those people are not. If you don't exclude gently, you can't include. Heaven or hell. You can come to church every week, or you can be with the sinners. But there has to be inclusion by exclusion. So we still market and sell the same way to this day. And I don't know how we got off topic a little bit like that, but
that's a great perspective for when people are being fed something.
That's, I guess, how we got off. It's if you want to buy into that, you come with me and you believe, right? If you don't believe,
but then you will be disappointed because there's no one inside.
Because there's no one in the nightclub. And if you believe the gentleman who says we're going to build all these houses, it sounds so wonderful that you want to put money into the jar on Sunday because it sounds awesome.
Solution.
But it's wrong.
Yeah.
And until you learn the lessons of the velvet rope and include by excluding, we always include by excluding people. There has to be. Dr. Seuss used to call them the star-bellied sneetches. I don't know if the kids still listen to that, but one had a star on their belly and one didn't. And they were the good guys and the bad guys. And then they changed and they went, well, we're no different. That was the whole thing from the 40s and 50s. And I used to think, okay, this is just all horseshit. Yeah. So it goes, pardon me, I didn't say that on your podcast. It goes back to educate yourself. So not only taking action, step 2, number 1 is educate. Find out what's real. Find out what's really real and do your homework on economics.
And the way you find out things are real is by understanding context.
Beautiful segue. I love it. There's a book. Beyond the Blindfold.
As someone who obviously works with a lot of developers and has a lot of insight into how development and economics and of course foresight works, what is kind of the current stance of developers? We've kind of talked to a few ourselves and they are, a bunch of them are sitting on land and they're not even trying to move forward because of red tape. I kind of wanted to hear your perspective on that with who you're working with. And I guess when they will be more, granted access to help with the supply side.
I work with developers all day long. I still do development myself, so I got my foot in both camps. I hear of very few people who are sitting waiting. And I'm not being difficult or contradictory. We can't get supply fast enough. Correct. Everybody complains about City Hall and it's easy to hack on City Hall. It's fun and it's easy, right? They're the guys that they're the devils, right? They're the ones who are causing the problem. They're the guys like, I got 52 projects, there's only one of me, the other guy went on holiday and I don't know what you want me to do. There's so much red tape, there's a public hearing, leave me alone. So these poor guys get vilified all the time. And so I'm not going to hack on them today. Every developer that I know can't wait to get product to market. Absolutely as fast. We can't possibly build enough homes. To your very point on your last podcast where you, again, to reiterate, said there's 10,000 standing inventory, 100,000 people coming for sure, and another 50,000, another 50,000. The city of Surrey, if you believe the numbers, grows at 1,000 people per month. Let's cut that in half. Let's say 500 is true. 500 people per month. Where are they going to live? There is no chance. I do a lot of work in Central Surrey, and betting against Central Surrey is like betting against Tom Brady. You just don't. Everything, and there's a whole bunch of reasons, a whole nother podcast, what happened to Surrey and how it all started with Quattro and Yale Town comes to Surrey and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That was us who did that.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So we ruined Surrey. Sorry, Surrey. I have single-handedly ruined Squamish and Surrey. So, well, that's another story. But the developers that I know, and I know a lot of them, we can't get to market fast enough. So there's a huge push. There's a huge push. And to be fair, some of the mayors and some of the councillors are really trying. But they've got their hands tied too by process, and they got their hands tied by the public hearing crowd. That no matter what they try and approve, it's too big, too small, too fast, too little. Port Moody is going through this. Port Moody's growth has been absolutely explosive. I will say it because I'm sure they're going to hear this. They're struggling in Port Moody to come to terms, in my perspective and context, with the reality that Port Moody is where people want to live.
100%.
It's sort of affordable. You've got the SkyTrain and you've got the West Coast Express, so people who work for a living can live in Port Moody.
And you've got the outdoor side, the nature side, which is so attractive.
So they should get a gold star for making Port Moody awesome, but every time we try to build inventory, it gets squished. It gets squished by a council who hasn't come to terms with the fact that they did such good work that they invited everybody to Port Moody and then don't want to let them in the gate. They've got a velvet rope with the nightclubs full. Right? So they're in a really tough spot, and it's easy to say, those counselors, this and that. I don't think that's me. But it's not, they're just not equipped. And that's about the nicest word I can say. I don't think they're equipped for the growth. And take a city like Mission. Sorry, I get off topic a little bit. A city like Mission has seen explosive growth. There hadn't been a multifamily project built in Mission for 15 years. Yeah. So what's the multifamily planner been doing? Sudoku and crossword puzzles. He's in charge of multifamily. He's doing nothing. All of a sudden, we brought 10 applications to Mission.
Whoa.
He didn't know what to do. He doesn't even understand it. You can be the nicest guy. Yeah. You can do all this. You can't process 10 projects. And now there's 15, 20 of them in Mission. Wow. They can't staff up fast enough. There's nowhere to live. People that work in Mission are living in Vancouver and driving to Mission every day. We think it goes the other way. It also goes that way.
Wow.
Anyway, so it's a you don't want to hack on the counselors too much, but every developer is going as fast as they can. Everybody's going as fast as they can. Land prices are going crazy, of course, supply and demand. Yeah. As part of my job, I have to know the revenue side of every project, but I also have to know land values. Because my typical client will call me and say, I'm standing on a piece of land in Port Coquitlam. Should I buy it? Yes. How much should I pay? Well, that depends on the zoning and this and that. How much per foot? Everything's per buildable foot. And so we have to advise our clients on the day they buy the land, but I don't get fully paid until the day they hand the keys over to the client 6-7 years later. Crazy business, don't get into this business. But so our breadth of knowledge that you touched on has to be super detailed on land, construction costs, revenue, city hall processes, and then what's it going to look like in 18, 24 months or 5 years?
So to kind of wrap things up, because I kind of want to leave our listeners with the moral of the story, if you will.
Aesop's fables. Vince's fables.
So you have a book on context.
I do.
And we started the podcast by saying, you need to have some sort of global perspective of what's happening with real estate to understand the micro side of it. So what would be the best thing, other than read your book?
That'd be a great start.
That you could recommend to people who are trying to buy their first home and the way they are thinking about real estate?
I would also, aside from, thank you for the nice plug on the book, I did refer once again to Atlas Shrugged. And it's an old book, and if you haven't read it, please go get a copy today, because it's a timeless book that really teaches us a lot about the fabric of our society, and that is kind of the overarching thing. Where are we today? What's changing? What hasn't changed? So I think the lesson is, as much as we think today's problem is new, it's not as new as you would think. Work, save, invest. There is no shortcut to those 3 steps. Like your gentleman in Chilliwack, he worked, and he worked, and he worked, and he saved, and one day the little boy grew up in the Jack and the Beanstalk, and up it went, and he got the golden goose. Now I'm probably got my fairy tales mixed up. The point is, you have to educate, and then you have to take action. But you have to work, save, and invest. And unfortunately, there's no shortcut to that. And it's not very sexy, because I'm saying things that people don't necessarily want to hear.
Well, no, I think we're also being fed shortcuts.
We are being fed shortcuts
by our politicians, and like we just touched on, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work, and you got to work harder. You got to work more. There's lots of people who talk about life balance. I'm not one of them. I was invited to speak at Capilano College one time. I called them a bunch of babies. That did not go well. I did not get invited back. But they were talking to me about work-life balance, and they wanted to work 3 days a week and go canoeing. And I said, that's great. I work 100 hours a week on purpose, but this is what I choose. Now, it's not for everybody. We need people to work in hospitals and build roads and do stuff. But then you can't complain.
That's right.
You can't be a hypocrite and want it both ways. And that's the difficult thing of being an investor, being a parent, as many of people listening are. You're trying to help your kids. If you want to help them, then you first have to help yourself, because sadly, only the rich can help the poor.
That's right.
And that's a thing that's not very popular. You go back to Atlas Shrugged. If you don't build factories and employ people, and then you tax the people who build the factories out of business, then everybody's poor, but that guy's left because he's got lots of money. So they're tough life lessons, and I absolutely have every level of respect for people who do the tough jobs every day, who make the 50 grand, who are happy to make the 50 grand. It's a hard thing to do in Vancouver. It's hard to do real estate. But if you want to start a new company, if you want to build it up, if you want to be one of the new people who are going to make the big money working for Amazon, get a better job, to your point. Work hard, save your money, but more than anything, educate yourself and get into the market. They used to say there's 2 perfect times to plant a tree. One of them was 10 years ago.
That's right.
Right?
Well, the best time to buy real estate was 10 years ago.
Well, that's exactly, we used to say, don't wait to buy real estate and wait. And I think perhaps that's a nice way to end it, because if you just buy it and don't touch it like those old White Rock folks and your guys, your example from Point Grey, you're going to do very, very well.
Vince, I hear that term obviously in the investment world a lot. And I think as we do have a lot of investors that listen to this podcast, maybe we would be amiss not to give them a bit of insight. You sound quite bullish on GVRD.
Oh, yes. Our follow-up question. Yes. Bonus question for $65,000.
Just one quick one then, I guess, if you're open to it.
Of course.
For the investors, if you had to pick one place in Canada, one city in Canada. I mean, we're BC-based. Let's maybe keep it BC.
Okay, that's more.
What city in BC would you say go and buy a pre-sale in for the best appreciation likely to happen for the foreseeable future?
Hands down, Mission.
Interesting.
Hands down, Mission. Close second is Maple Ridge and Abbotsford. We used to forget about Mission because it was over there. It was on the number 7.
I didn't even really think it was there.
Because we drive up and down the number 1 all the time, and you think Abbotsford. Abbotsford's awesome, but everybody already knows about Abbotsford.
And it's expensive.
It is expensive. It's a great place to live, and people from Abbotsford, and I'll be very quick because I know we're coming to the end of your time here. People in Abbotsford identify themselves as from Abbotsford. If you meet them on holidays, you say I'm from Vancouver, they say, well, I'm from Abbotsford.
Really? That's a good point.
They're more akin to Kamloops. Like, if you ask my Abbotsford staff, do you ever come to Vancouver? They say, why? Unless the Canucks came, like, I got everything I need. My kids got great schools. It's water, fresh air. It's Okanagan. Piss off. I'm not living anywhere. Mission was forgotten. Not anymore. We just finished a couple of projects in Mission. And at this moment, at the moment of recording this, it is the cheapest development land in the GVRD, period.
Wow.
You can buy land to build a project under $50 a foot. To give you a sense of it, if you're on the west side of Vancouver or anywhere else, you're at $400, $500 a foot.
Yeah.
Where is the price going to go from $50 a foot? We just sold out a beautiful, beautiful project called Wren and Raven out there. That average price in there was about $550 a foot. Now, when I phoned realtors in Burnaby, they said $550 a foot. Where's this Magic Kingdom? Yeah. The people in Mission said $550 a foot. I could have bought that in 1970. I said, well, how's that waiting program working for you?
Yeah.
You didn't.
Yeah.
Right? You heard my story about Canby Street and my guy giving me grief about that.
Yeah.
If you've got some money, part 2 is buy everything you can, but also buy land. Whoever controls the land controls the deal. Absolutely. Go buy land today. That's the city. That's the call.
Down in Las Vegas, for example, they're still building on Howard Hughes's land. Mm-hmm. He bought it at a time when he didn't even know what it was going to be used for. He just knew at some point it was going to be valuable.
Right.
And he's been dead for 50 years. He's still making money.
Still making money. Well, that's how you get your kids into real estate. That's how you get yourself. And a small plug for Mission. They've done a beautiful job. They're adapting as quickly as they can. Yeah. It used to be, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but you get the point. It used to be a bedroom community where about 20% of the people lived and worked in Mission, and the rest had to commute. Mm-hmm. That's why it was tough to live in Mission. Today, it's about 50 or 60%. So you can actually live and work. The brewery out in Chilliwack made a huge difference, 2,000 direct jobs and 5,000 indirect jobs. Yeah. But the whole idea of small business, back to that thing, you can start a business of 5 people or less and live in Mission. You can work from home. You can do sales and marketing and this and that. You can export your talents without having to leave.
Right.
So Mission has now become an outdoor mecca. It's fantastic. And you don't have to commute 2 hours to get to work. Now, unfortunately, there are still a bunch of people that do, but it's gone from 20 to 50%.
Wow.
Quality of life out there is unbelievable. And as of probably when people hear this, the price just jumped another $50 a foot.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Mission. Sorry. Except for me, because I just bought a place in Mission. I'm a hypocrite. Go, Mission, go, right?
He's the Elon Musk of Mission here.
Well, hey, we want it to go down the day we buy it, and every day after we want it to go up. So don't cry to me about affordability if you're in the market, right? Because that's a hypocrite.
So these points and more have all been fantastic. I believe they can be found in your book.
Yes, they can.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how they can access this
Yes,
book?
by all means. Very short plug. Beyond the Blindfold. I hope it's fun and entertaining. It sounds a little heavy duty, but it was a 10-year odyssey. And I'll give you a real very quick thing. It was about 10 years ago. It's hard to believe that, call it 20 years ago, there was no such thing as the internet or email. It didn't exist. And it seems odd, right? So if you wanted to have an in-depth conversation with your buddy, you either had to drive across town or write a letter, which nobody did when we're 20 years old, or you could have a phone conversation, but there was only one phone in the hallway, and your sister was listening. So you can't really, I hate my wife, I hate my kid. All of a sudden, email came along, and we could have really introspective, deep, meaningful discussions with our friends privately. So we're doing this back and forth, and, what do you think about this? I'm going to get a new job. My kid's starting baseball. And I'm writing back and I'm trying to be really, give good answers to my friend who's asked me some questions. And I thought, my answers are just bad. Like this doesn't, because when you actually have to put it in writing, you can have a couple of pints and sit around and pontificate. Yeah. But you got to put it in writing and hit this send, you've got mail.
Yeah.
And I thought, I wonder where these perspectives came from. Like, why do I believe that they're good and they're bad, or this is true and that isn't true? And I thought, where? So I started to peel the lid off. Where did my experiences come from? Well, they come from your mother. They come from your teacher. They come from the guy that helped you fix your bike. Those immigrants, they're bad.
Yeah.
This job, that's good. Carrots give you good eyesight. Okay, carrot. No, they don't. But your grandma told you, your mom told you, and your teacher told you. So then I'm spewing out things that are absolutely wrong. It was a horribly introspective journey to say, I have to test my context of reality against everything I've ever known. I have to do a deep dive into finding out what's true and what's not true. Consensus isn't the goal. This isn't a self-help book. I'm going to tell you what I went through, and then you can say, if you disagree with me on something, the challenge is, tell me why. Articulate whether we're right or wrong, because we're supposed to have different opinions. We're supposed to have different points of view. But understanding that they came from the crucible of your experience is an awakening moment. So I spent 10 years, very difficult to write this stuff, and difficult to be honest, and difficult to fall on your sword.
Well, in all honesty, it's kind of the mind of, do you control your thoughts, or do your thoughts control you?
Well, that's a beautiful way of saying it, and I'm afraid I was a victim of my environment. We used to ride our 3-speed bike with a banana seat to the library, and I've used this before to look up polar bears, right? And if there was a book in the library about polar bears, whatever it said was true. Mm-hmm. But what if it wasn't true? That's right. You told your kids what was true because you were told it was true. So now we're dealing with a very interconnected world. In those days, the world was less connected, so you didn't have to worry because everybody looked like you, acted like you, political correctness aside. You went to baseball practice and hockey practice. Right. And you didn't travel much. Air travel wasn't a thing, right? So today's interconnected world requires us to have a context and understanding of the macroeconomics of the world. And it's really helped me in my personal life and business, and helps me make better decisions. So,
cool.
From that perspective, it was a great exercise.
Awesome. Amazing.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Vince. It's been a pleasure. We've learned a lot. And if people want to learn more about yourself or Pilothouse, where can they go?
You can find me easily. Just shoot me a note at info@pilothouseinc.com. Our website's there. I will absolutely call you back. Absolutely answer the email. I love talking about this stuff, whether it's the book or real estate. In fact, I got a couple of calls this afternoon with people who have said, hey, I heard you talking about this. I'm going to buy my first house. Can you call me? Cool. I absolutely can, because I love it. And you guys should be thanked for giving the people of Vancouver a platform to learn and educate themselves, which of course is step one. So congratulations to you guys as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
All right.